Right, since it's too wet to do any gardening today, and I've hurt my finger, hurt my hand, I thought I'd still do a chewing the fat session, but instead of talking about the garden, I'd talk about myself a bit. Why not? If there's anything more interesting than me to talk about, take it outside and kill it. That's my opinion. Right, so it may come as, well, some people already know, but it may come as a surprise that in my youth I was quite an experienced, quite an accomplished mountaineer and potholer. Went on quite a few international expeditions. I climbed a lot in the Alps and in the Himalayas. I were reasonably skilled. And as for potholing, yeah. Spluy della Preta, Piazza Martins, Juveberge, some of the deepest potholes that were known in the 70s. So in my climbing travels, I came across quite a few famous names. Now, when I were a kid, probably the most famous climbers in Britain were Joe Brown, Don Willans, Hamish McInnes, Doug Glaston, maybe a bit young at that time, and Chris Bonington. They were the big names, the big mountaineers and big climbers. I first came across Joe Brown and Don Willans in Derbyshire, actually, climbing, where were we? Roaches, I think. So that's Staffordshire rather than Derbyshire. But rock climbing anyway. And they were both, well, they were virtually professional climbers by that time, but they started out as plumbers and plumbing apprentices in Manchester. In fact, Don Willans came from Salford, very close to where I used to live when I were at university. Didn't know him, but I got to know him. A very laconic, dry-humoured Salford bloke. Chain smokes near us, damn it. I never saw him with a cigarette, which is unusual for a climber, ultra-fit mountaineer. And his capacity for beer were phenomenal. Very nice bloke though. But he also invented a lot of climbing equipment, stuff that people take for granted these days. Climbing harnesses. Well, I'll start with one of the most iconic piece of equipment that are designed, which is the Willans Whammer. It's a combination peat and hammer, ice pick, descender, chisel end. It did a lot of things. It never really caught on. This is a very early prototype. Don invented them for the Annapurna South Face expedition in the 1970s, and everybody had one. Originally the spike were about that long, but I've used it that much. It's worn down to about half its length. But no one really liked them that much, apart from Don and myself. I weren't on the expedition, but he gave me one to try. As I say, it were a prototype. Made by another friend of mine in Skipton in Yorkshire. I never remember his name. Anyway, troll climbing equipment. I'll remember it. I'll look it up and put it at the bottom of the screen. So troll climbing equipment in Skipton made it, and they also made his sit harness, the Willans harness, the first ever invented, probably the most useful piece of equipment ever made for climbing. But because they weren't sure about the welding, they had to drill a little hole through it to put a thermocouple in. They used stainless steel welding for strength. That bit there you can't see now much, but it's knurled for grip. you use it as a descender, putting your rope through and round and clipping it on. It were a very useful thing. I used it mainly for chopping out crevices, getting out ice and pebbles and so on out of crevices. Or once I'd put a bog in or a chock in, also made by Troll. They invented a lot of stuff, Troll, made a lot of stuff. Getting them back out again. You didn't leave an expensive bit of kit like a chock or a bong in a crack. You use them for safety. You had a carabiner on the end and you run your rope through. So if you fell, the person that would belaying you could stop you at the last belay you put in, the last carabiner you'd put in. So Willen's Whammer, very, very rare. I think you only find them in museums now. Certainly the climbing museum in Scotland has got one. I don't know many other people that have got them, because I said they weren't that popular. It came into its own, not so much on the South Annapurna expedition in the 70s, but Don, Joe, Hamish McKinney's, and I think it were Doug Laston, were asked by the Guyana government to climb Mount Roraima, sort of like 1,000-foot sheer face. If you've ever seen or heard of Lost World, it's a big 20 square mile plateau with sheer cliffs all the way around it. And no way to get to it from it, and it's also at the junction of 3 countries that were all claiming ownership of the mountain, and the only way to get to it was to trek through jungle for a fortnight, then climb up this sheer and in places overhanging wall, and people used them a lot for smash the hell out of spiders that were in the way, deadly spiders. There's a book written by, I think Hamish McKinney's wrote the book. If you ever find it, it's a funny book. And also, if you're into climbing, an exciting book. So see if you can find it and have a read of it. But that's the famous Willen's Whammer. No idea of its value these days. It's a virtually unique museum piece. And I were using it in garden yesterday for bashing bits off the fence. It's virtually indestructible. My God, I mean, it's what, 50-year-old? Yeah, 50-year-old. And apart from the tip wearing down, still going strong. In other chewing the fats, I've got plenty more unique mountaineering equipment left to show you, and climbed equipment. This were made by another friend of mine, Hugh McNichol, who had a factory in, well, he moved to Glencoe from Glasgow. He was an aircraft engineer, and he made me a personalised, which later became Mountain Technology, he called his company, walking axe. But he made this especially for me, for my length. But I'll tell you about that at another time. Nice bloke, terrible businessman. And I've also got a lot of climbing equipment made by a firm called Clogwyn Climbing Gear, based in Wales, in Snowdonia. And that were another friend of mine, Denny Morehouse, who had that company. And I used to trust life and limb on some of his trial and experimental pieces of equipment. Nearly all my equipment were early prototypes. So that's something for the future, on another rainy day. So for the time being, I said ta-ra. Ta-ra!